everyone. On behalf of IGNCA and CATS, I welcome all the speakers and each one of you to the Play Stories telling session of Festival of Places 2020-21, jointly hosted by Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, IGNCA New Delhi, and CATS. The Festival of Places is an initiative of CATS, a not-for-profit organization working in the area of heritage conservation, management, and advocacy since 2001. We at CATS feel very strongly about the dismal state of public spaces in our cities and firmly believe change in the way we think, talk, and use public spaces can only begin at the grassroots by creatively engaging people with places and empowering them to make a difference to the places and spaces around. The Festival of Places is an idea born out of the spirit of volunteerism to come together, collaborate, co create, and celebrate places that nurture health, happiness, and foster community living. Moreover, the festival aims to help discover the much overlooked human dimension of places. The main highlight of the festival this year is Play Stories, a series of online storytelling sessions that help understand the hidden dimensions, multiple interpretations, and varied memories associated with places, highlighting their distinct characteristics as well as unraveling the bond that people have with them, a connection that lives through their experiences. The storytelling sessions by professionals, scholars, and students from diverse fields focused on public spaces have been planned around the idea of exploring memory in places. Every journey has a beginning and a culmination before we embark on yet another one. And in between the beginning and the end is what we call life. As we wander through the myriad lanes and bylanes of Varanasi that metaphorically symbolize the wanderings of our own individual lives, we eventually arrive at the most evocative transition space, the Ghats. Today, we will spend time on the Ghats of Varanasi as the sun sets, lending a magical golden hue to the Ganga to reflect on our meandering through life and find out what the emptiness of the Ghats as a space beholds for each one of us. The title of today's play story is Panchganga Ghat Varanasi, and the theme for the session is Ghat, a reflective social space. Our play storyteller for the session, Mr. Kaustubh Jaiswal, will be taking us around the Panchganga Ghat and share his memories with us. The place expert for the session, Professor Neeta Kumar, will unravel the mystical charm and cultural underpinnings of such reflective social spaces of interaction. Our play storyteller, Kaustubh Jaiswal, is a 19-year-old 3D enthusiast. He lives in Varanasi and is studying animation and VFX at the School of Entertainment Arts in Mumbai. He's always excited to learn new skills, the most current being beatboxing. He loves watching sci-fi thrillers and historical films. When he's not working, he likes to spend his time playing games with his friends. Our place expert, Professor Neeta Kumar, is a retired Brown Professor of South Asian History at the Claremont McKenna College, California. She is the author of The Artisans of Banaras, Princeton 1988, Friends, Brothers and Informants, Berkeley 1992, Lessons from School, Sage 2001, The Politics of Gender, Community and Modernity, Oxford 2007, editor of Women as Subjects, Virginia 1994, translator of My Kali for Women 2000, and co-editor of Food, Faith and Gender in South Asia, Bloomsbury 2021, with books and articles forthcoming. She is author of Oxford Bibliographies, Children and Childhood in Hinduism and Education and Hinduism. She has scripted the movie Shankar's Fairies that has been shown at Locarno, Busan, Toronto, Chicago, and Nantes film festivals, also based on her research with children. She publishes assorted essays and blogs, and 2 of her plays have been performed. Neeta Kumar runs the organization Nirman that works for children, families, education, and the arts, and the school Vidya Ashram, the South Point in Varanasi, India. Most recently, Nirman has made educational arts videos available at Neeta Kumar Educational Videos and Nirman Miraki Videos. Nirman's work includes 30 years of curricular development, running an integrated school, teaching teachers and families, and developing beautiful green campuses in Varanasi and Betwar Chitoni villages. More information is available at www.nirman.info and www.gangavan.wordpress.com. We now begin our conversation around Panchganga Ghat. I invite Kaustubh to present his play story.
So, good afternoon, one and all present over here. Before we dive into my video that I made, I just want to talk about the video. So, Varanasi, being one of the oldest cities in India, has accumulated tons of public places, both old and new. But the one I'm going to talk about today is one of the oldest places here in Varanasi. The place I'm talking about is the Panchganga Ghat. Even though there are around 82 ghats in Varanasi, this one holds a special place in my heart. I've been to this Ghat several times with family, with friends, or even alone, and in different settings like before sunrise or before sunset and whatnot. But the experiences I have here are different no matter whichever time I consider. Every experience I have is different. So I'd like you all to go with me through my journey and my experiences of this Ghat. Thank you.
Do you want me to share my screen and share the video, or you do that?
Yeah, I think you should do it. My
Okay.
sharing has some problems.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Panchganga Ghat, one of the 88 ghats in Varanasi, it is approximately 5 kilometers away from the Can station. This place holds a special place in my heart because of the contrasting and hard hitting experiences I've had here. It's incredible how a place this old is still relevant to the present times. The Panchganga Ghat is one of the 5 oldest ghats in Varanasi, collectively known as the Panch Tirth. Built in the 1500s by Raja Raghunath Tandon, there are two narratives to how this ghat got its name. The first and the more well known one talks about how 5 rivers invisibly meet at this ghat, the rivers being Ganges, Saraswati, Yamuna, Kirana, and Dudhpapa. According to the second story, 5 sages lived at this ghat and later had temples dedicated to them, and this is a reason why it is called Panchganga. To reach this 500-year-old spectacle is no walk in the park. You have to go through the busy road of chalk into a narrow street which only gets narrower as you move forward. While in these streets, one will find several things that are interesting in their own way. The houses on either side would easily be 150 years to 200 years old, each one unique in design. The houses have intricate patterns on the railing of the veranda, eye catching embossing on the front door, and unique windows. Some of them repainted recently, some not. Some so old that the paint is flaky and one can see the colors of the previous coat. The roads of these streets are just squarish stones laid in brick-like pattern which makes it very uneven. There are all the three commonly found street animals, namely cows, dogs, and cats, roaming up and down the streets as they own it. And when there are cows, there is the inevitable cow dung. But the smell of that and the smell of incense sticks lit in almost every house cancel each other out somehow. One constant you'd find everywhere is pan or gutka spit on every corner, be it the stairs or the streets. Before sunrise, these streets are really quiet and peaceful. They feel very calm, but as the sun starts to come up, one can hear the daily commotions of household. People leaving the house for their jobs or just to run some errands, sounds of bells from temples nearby, and aarti from every other house. During the daytime, some two-wheelers also wheel into the streets. Once you overcome all these, you reach the end of the street, which is so narrow that two people can hardly walk together. But once they do, they catch the first glance of this 500-year-old ghat. You don't see it in its entirety though. Your vision is funneled by the buildings, so it's a narrow gap you see the ghat, river Ganga, and the sun through. To the right of this street is the Alamgir Mosque. The Alamgir Mosque stands right behind this ghat. It is believed that this mosque was built by Aurangzeb on top of the Bindu Madhav temple. This ghat was formerly known as the Bindu Madhav Ghat, but after the mosque was built, its name was changed as well. One might think that having two such religiously important landmarks so close to each other would be conflicting, but it's nothing like that. If anything, it is beautiful. A turn to the right and there stands the Alamgir Mosque, and go straight ahead and you'll find the Panchganga Ghat. Another example of religious harmony here is the story of how Kabir Das got his Guru Mantra, that is accepted as a student from Saint Ramanand. Even though Kabir Das has a ghat dedicated to himself, it is one of the most important stories of his life. It is said that Kabir Das wanted to be Ramanand's student, but he was really young. He requested Ramanand but was rejected for the same reason, but Kabir Das was determined. He knew that Ramanand came to the ghat every morning to take a bath in the holy river, so he decided to lie down on one of these steps. When Ramanand was coming down the stairs, he stepped on him by mistake and the words Hey Ram came out. Kabir Das accepted these words as his Guru Mantra and became a disciple of him. Now we see the Ram Rahim synergy in Kabir Das's dohas, another example of how religions blend seamlessly here. The same steps can be found here to date. The reason being, the steps on the Panchganga Ghat are as old as the ghat itself, meaning they are 500 years old. They are the oldest set of steps on any ghat. Going down the first set of steps, which are around 10 to 15, one can see red engraving on white marble to their right. The engraving shows two scenes, the first one being the incident where Kabir Das is on the stairs and Ramanand is about to step on him. The second one shows Kabir Das sitting with the other disciples of Ramanand. Going down the second set of 20 to 25 steps, you reach the main body of the ghat. That platform is what we call the ghat in the true sense. You can smell the incense sticks, the smell is really pleasant. No benches or stairs can be seen because the steep steps double as seats. From here, we can see a small set of stairs and stone platforms alternating. The steps lead directly to the river Ganga, while the platforms are used for several activities. Some people perform yoga on it, some offer their morning prayers, some just sit or stand there. Under the platform, though, are small temples. They aren't accessible from the side of the ghat. You have to go down the steps and come around the riverside to go in these temples. These temples are also believed to be hundreds of years old. The rough texture of the stone on the steps of the platform make it dusty but never dirty. Bathing at this ghat among the other Panch Tirth is considered really auspicious, especially among the Kartik month, that is mid-October to November in the Hindi calendar. During these months, there are a large number of people bathing in the river Ganga. It is considered that taking a dip during these months purifies the mind and the soul. Being almost 500 years old, there are also a lot of temples and pindas where people come to offer their prayers. During the same month is the time for the migratory Siberian birds to come to Ganga. It is a beautiful sight to see and feel, flocks of birds in the water chirping and roaming around. During these months, there are Akash Deep lit at the ghat. They are diyas lit in a straw basket hung from a bamboo stick. They look like floating diyas in the air, hence the name Akash, that is sky, and Deep, that is lantern. The temperature during these times is great. Light breeze from the side of the river and a little bit of fog can be felt and seen. The best time to be there is during sunset or sunrise. During sunrise, there is the smell of incense in the air. The surroundings are cold and there is light fog. There is occasionally a train passing by from the far left on the Rajghat bridge. Then the sun comes up, painting the blank sky like a canvas with beautiful colors. The best part is there are no buildings blocking the view. After the sunset, there are people mostly relaxing, enjoying the view, or just existing. One can see students in groups practicing different instruments, singing, rapping, and just enjoying themselves. One of the experiences that I hold close to me is the sunrise of Panchganga Ghat. Sitting on the ghat waiting for the sun to rise, being lost in my thoughts, I realize how little we as humans sometimes perceive ourselves. We have the imagination capacity like no other creature. We ask questions that even we sometimes don't have answers to. I realize how I can have an impact on the world if I set my mind to it. Sometimes we forget that we have an individual identity. We are more than someone's sibling, child, cousin, etc. But we are an individual human with our thinking and personality. We sometimes don't value the thoughts we have. We don't take them seriously. At least I didn't. But sitting there realizing how strong thoughts alone can be made me respect thoughts as an idea itself. This also made me think about mental health too and to take care of it for me and for the people around me. Another experience I had during sunset was the opposite of the previously mentioned one. Ironically enough, watching groups of people on the ghat practicing, worshipping, eating, and doing all sorts of things made me think how little control we have over our own lives. Watching dead bodies burning at a distance on the Manikarnika Ghat, I felt how we spend our lives telling ourselves that wherever we are is because of the decisions we made. But if we think about it, all we do is initiate. When we say something worked out for us, there are a lot of things that we don't have control over, but they fall into place. When we say something didn't work out for us, it's just those variables not falling into place or the way we would like them to. Everything happens as an effect of something and it happens for a reason. I realize no matter what I do, some things are just out of my reach. I can't change them. It's an experience that is hard to put in words. I felt how insignificant we were as human beings. We call ourselves the smartest being on earth, and yet sometimes we fail to understand how our lives, let alone the universe, functions. But my visits there are not always just deep and mind numbing. Mostly, it's a fun evening spent with friends or family, just like others present there. We either sit there and talk about anything and everything or go for a boat ride. As good as the ghat is, there are some things that could be improved. The lanes could be improved so that people have easier access to the ghat. Also, there should be better changing rooms, especially for women.
you, Kaustubh, for this very engaging story and you're sharing your personal experiences. I will now like to invite Professor Neeta Kumar to share her memory and experiences about Varanasi.
Yeah, thank you, Urvashi. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me comment on this very interesting video by Kaustubh. Kaustubh, you did a really good job of capturing all the lovely turns of the gully, the colors of everything, the shade, the nuances. And we can all tell that you really enjoyed spending time there and then making a film out of it.
Yeah, I actually did. Thank you.
I think some of the purposes of this meeting and the session that it's part of are surely fulfilled by this kind of a video. It gives us a lot to ponder on. Now, having been asked to comment, I'd like to first say a little bit about my own feelings and approaches and so on to this topic. I'm actually an old lover of Banaras. I wasn't born here or anything, but I came here for my research back in 1981 and got very, very impressed by it in the sense that it made a deep impression on me. It led a very permanent mark on me. It changed me for my life, my touch with Banaras. I spent 2 years there on my research, produced a book called The Artisans of Banaras, but more than that, it really made me think um, about how great a civilization could be. That's it in a nutshell. That there could be a time when, as you know, in Hinduism, there are these four aims of life: dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. But to see in practice that these actually could all coexist and they could all be so nicely deployed in the same space of a city over centuries and millennia was of unutterable, it made a huge impression on me. I mean, I couldn't believe that actually there could have been a time when a civilization reached these heights. And there it was. I mean, the remnants were there for us to see. I'm not saying that in 1981 the civilization was still at that height, but it was perfectly possible to understand it and believe in it. So I like to, because you need a structure to any talk that you try to present on Banaras. I like to think of these four aims of life as a kind of structural skeleton, because as many scholars have done, you can actually talk about Banaras at these different levels. And the first one would, of course, be partly what Kaustubh has done, which is to talk of it in spiritual or quasi-spiritual terms. It's about the Ganga, and there is no end to what you can do in terms of research on the Ganga, going back and looking at it in the Vedas, Upanishads, and most of all the Purans. And there is a whole Puranic genre called the Mahatmya. And if you look at the Mahatmyas, there is all these tales about the Ganga and the Ganga being a goddess and how all that is played out. She is the partner of Vishnu, and then she's the partner of Shiva. But she's also so many other roles. And she's the one goddess who is a very benign mother. Most other goddesses have a touch of the dark about them, but not Ganga. I mean, obviously, she can drown human beings, and there are stories about that also, but it always has a meaning, and there is a benign aspect that comes out. So this whole inflation, let's say, of the mythology of a river is so powerful and so central in Hinduism that rivers all over the country, deep in the south and so on, are also given the epithet Ganga, just to make them seem sacred and as waters to bathe in and respect. So starting from that mythology, and then of course building up a whole pilgrimage center around it, which is partly a professional thing done by priests and pandas and all that. But it works. And if it works, that means people actually believe it. They have the faith to travel from everywhere and come to this pilgrimage center to take a dip in the Ganges or perform their rituals by the side of the river and all that. So that thing is, you use the term imagination, Kaustubh. I would suggest that that is a feat of the imagination. And the Hindu imagination is, of course, very, very fertile, fecund. It's always producing more stories and myths and images and elaborating it, just like the very noted scholar Wendy Doniger says. It's like that creature inside the sea that lets out a blob of ink and it spreads everywhere and looks very interesting. So at the slightest drop of a hat, she used to say, a Hindu person would sprout out some kind of mythology, and each single myth then in turn can produce even more myths. And that's the history of all our stories in the Hindu past. So Banaras is amazing that way. Many, many, many places in India are like that. But Banaras has the advantage of being at a particular geographical site on the river, which acts as a kind of natural amphitheater. So the sun rises on the east and bathes the whole city in light. And as Costa pointed out, if you look out at the river and beyond, all you see is the expanse of the sea and then the wide river. There are no buildings. And I wonder when the buildings will come up, because one day or the other they will, if our population expands as it's doing. So let's not worry about that right now. But if you look back into the past, coming into the present, there is this natural advantage. But let me move on to the next thing, which is the earth aspect. There has been always a huge system of patronage in Banaras, and there needs to be for things that are spiritual and religious to survive. So because of the location on the river, it was a great place for trade and commerce, and merchants have been very prominent from Buddhist times. So all the Buddhist stories mention them. Many stories that you read in now X, they used to be very popular magazines like Chanda Mama used to begin एक बनारस में एक I don't know what they said for merchant, Dukandar, Bania. I'm at a loss suddenly. But the gist of it was that there was this merchant in Banaras. You know, many stories begin like that. Or people journeyed to Banaras to make their fortune, and they did it. And if you look at the heart of the city, not at the ghats, but the inside areas, they are a maze of alleys, just like the ones that lead to the ghats, but they're all about shopping and trading and commerce. And there are tons of manufacturers. It's not only the natural place of a very fertile hinterland from where it draws all kinds of products, but itself, it has been a kind of manufacturing area for centuries, for millennia. So these merchants were very powerful, so much so that when there was a Raja of Banaras, which happened only 300 years ago, he had to always be in league with the merchants. He never was a ruler, as many other rulers, rajas and princes were in the rest of the country. He was a nominal ruler, not one in fact, because there was a kind of meritocracy which consisted of the merchants. And when the East India Company took over, and then later the British Crown, they had to have a similar kind of understanding. So Banaras was never really ruled either by a king, a native ruler, or by the British. It was always indirectly ruled. So it has this great spirit of independence for which the commerce is basically responsible. Now, the commerce is very interesting, and my whole love of the city is partly based on the fact that there is so much love of pleasure and entertainment in it. My whole study has been of work and leisure routines in this city, because people believed, here is the height of philosophy, if you like, that you should work hard, but you should play equally hard. And there are actual manuals which I've studied, which are educational manuals for young merchant boys. They were all educated at home, which say that you have to not only be very good in your account keeping and the merchandise that you're dealing with, but then you have to know how to spend your money. And how do you spend it? You spend it by going out boating, going out across the river, enjoying the natural landscape, enjoying socialization, enjoying friends, company, and enjoying the arts. So there we come to the third aspect, which is the calm aspect, the arts. And that's what really makes Banaras a brand name. There is Banarsi Tumri and Banarsi Kajli and Banarsi Kathak and Banarsi Tabla in one kind of arts, music and dance. And then there's the pan and the chaat and all the foodstuffs and the sweets and all that. There is clothing, yeah, the beauty of the brocade and the saris and all that. So all the senses are involved, and as you can tell, they feed into each other. So one thing, the sari, for instance, feeds into the commerce, which in turn, through patronage, feeds into the religious aspects, the pilgrimage aspects of Banaras. It's all very, very intricately interwoven. And then here's the ghats. Of course, the mentioned there are these cremation ghats. Panchganga is not one of them, but quite close to it is the main one, and then there are 2 or 3 others. Why are they so important? Jonathan Parry, who is an anthropologist whose work is on death in Banaras, has said that it's not that the ghats are there because it's Banaras, but Banaras is there because it's the ghats. In other words, the ghats are the primordial things there, and the city has built up itself around it. The ghats are so important because the river is so important, and the river makes it somehow credible to believe that in this benign mother's lap, you can return and be free of your sins and so on. That whole repertoire of beliefs of Hindus. So because of that, people come from far and near to bring their dead ones for cremation at the Banaras Ghats. And the interweaving of life and death is remarkable in this place. I've been living here since ever since I first came in 1981, first off and on, and now I live here permanently. I'm actually based in Banaras, and Urvashi mentioned some of the projects and all that I've been involved with. I have been deeply impressed by this interplay of life and death, and the fact that you can actually every single day witness a cremation procession going in some direction or the other to one of Banaras's ghats. According to me, it means nothing less than that, again, that kind of peak of philosophy where you can enjoy life to the hilt. You can really do everything, enjoy the sensual experiences and mauj and masti, which are the code words of Banaras, and all at the same time know that this is between a beginning and an end. And in that place in the middle is where you live life in a certain way. So moksha, that was the 4th value that I mentioned. So here it is, Banaras as a structure that demonstrates the interplay in Hinduism of dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. I want to mention one other thing, which is that about imagination. So this emphasis today, and in Kaustubh's video also, is on our thoughts, our feelings, as we experience the beauty of sunrise or sunset, as we sit on the ghats and watch the waves and watch the river flowing and see what other people are doing, which is somewhat similar. Thoughts are not just ours, but of our civilizations. So every single thing that you actually can observe and talk about, reflect on, such as the doorways, the beauty of the lanes, the stones, the way they're laid out, the steps, the angles of the buildings, the way the curves are made, the way the shadows fall. So architecture, as well as the spatial nature of a place like Banaras. These are products of people's feelings, of people's thoughts. That's what art comes from. And it is really, really very amazing how our forefathers and foremothers, all the people before us, we tend to think of them fuzzily, but they were as reflective as us, as sensitive as us. They actually sat by the riverside and they said, wow, what a beautiful, amazing spot this is. How should we respond to it? And they responded to it with their art and architecture and the kinds of spaces they developed. And from that, from that comes many other kinds of artistic enterprises, such as celebrating the spaces, celebrating the river, the music, the dance, the artwork, the crafts, and so on. But really set in stone, as it were, the most impressive and visually observable are the buildings and the stone steps and ghats and the landscape of Banaras. Now, I do want to mention one thing, which I think Kaustubh can take further in his next venture, and we can all reflect on. I'd love to have you discuss this through questions and answers, which is something called Orientalism. It's a dead or dying horse, so I don't want to flog it further. We all know that there has been a way of understanding India and Indian history, which is described by that term. And that means, approximately speaking, that Indians have been treated as somehow very exceptional or different, somehow spiritual and belonging to a kind of a category where they only worry about their souls or their hereafters and so on. So it's the gaze of the West upon a place like India to make it into a different kind of a place and a person. And Banaras has been a perfect target for that. When we talk about how special the Ghats are and the riverside of Banaras, we have to be very, very careful to not imagine that this is age old. It is not age old. Everything has a history, and they are very specifically 300, 400, 500 years old. Kaustubh did keep mentioning they're 500 years old. But you kept saying, Kaustubh, as if that was like really ancient. 500 is nothing in the telescope of India's history, right? It's old by our standards, but not by historian standards. So what does it mean? It means that actually most of Banaras was built during the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal period. And therefore, we have to be very aware of the fact that when we talk about Hindu-Muslim synthesis and any kind of synthesis, actually the truth is that we have in our hands a source for understanding this synthesis and understanding the problematic aspect of it. What the British did was, they are the ones who were the Orientalists, what the British did was that they separated the two strands that had come together till the 18th, 19th centuries over the past few hundred years. They separated it and they labeled each strand Hindu and Muslim, which are very artificial and distorting kind of categories. A temple, a ghat, and a residential place or a garden spot or any of the constructions that were made before the British period were naturally modeled on Mughal architecture, because that was the model that was being followed all over India. Even down to village zamindars' houses, there were specific techniques associated with it. And over the centuries of Mughal rule, they had come to be accepted as the best techniques. So even in the most quote unquote Hindu or religious parts of Banaras, those were the techniques being used. But when the British started labeling everything, just as they label caste and so on, they sometimes would come across a mandir, a temple, and say, oh, this is not Hindu because it has this kind of dome or this kind of archway or this kind of doorway. And so people then became aware of this kind of categorization, and they withdrew and retreated from the Mughal style and tried to make some kind of a new Hindu style of architecture. Now, this is much more recent, And that's not what you have been talking about, I realize that. But it's something to remember that the quote unquote most Hindu things that we see are sometimes, in fact, very Mughal in their actual architectural and spatial delineation. There's a wonderful book by Madhuri Desai, which I want to mention to you all, called Banaras Reconstructed: Architecture and Sacred Space in a Hindu Holy City. I reviewed it and I enjoyed it a lot. And that makes some of these points. There are many other books. I'm very proud of one, especially. Um, what is the name of it? It's by Saraswati Nandini Majumdar, called Banaras Walks Through India's Sacred City. And I'm very proud of it because she's my daughter. And she did all her research. I wasn't around, and she came up with a beautiful book. But it's not only got the history, the architecture, the spirituality and everything, but it's got actual maps. So it's divided into 10 different sections, each one of which gives a map of how you can walk through one part of Banaras and understand all these different parts of it. Okay, so I want to host more questions now. I'll stop here, Urvashi, and we can continue with a discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for your insights on Varanasi. They are, really deep insight, and your work in Varanasi has been, for decades, a very involved and deep research. Ma'am, you mentioned about how the ghats, which are probably not so old in their physical form, but the idea of the ghats is much more older than the physical ghats that as we see them today. So, could you please take us through, the need to connect with water has been primordial. Every time humans have wanted to connect with water in one way or the other, be it, through kunds or ghats or other means. So, could you just take us through a brief journey of how these ghats and this, the form that we see today, would have evolved? How does the different spaces, how do different rulers, assert their rights on these spaces, and how they have created this physical form as we see today?
Yeah, Rishi, sure. But as I was saying, there are people who have actually done it better than me. These two books are exactly about that. They go into detail about every single part of it. I can tell you in a broad outline that the city has shifted. It used to be only located in the north of the present city. The part in which BHU, Banaras Hindu University, is located, and actually a very, very busy and important part called Assi and Lanka in the south of Banaras, were all outside the city's boundaries. The city is delineated around it by a semicircle, which is a pilgrimage route. And it's important for all pilgrims. It used to be important. No one does it now. There are token ways to do it, symbolic ways to do it, by going to a few temples, and then you symbolically reconstruct that journey. But that actual semicircular journey was the boundary of Banaras. And the northern part is where the oldest temple is, Adikesha, and Rajghat, which is now so far away to most Banarsis that only those who live there actually enjoy it. No one else goes there much. So the city has been shifting south. The original center of it has also shifted. It used to be in a different part of what is Chowk, and now it is located in what's called the Vishwanath Mandir. What the government is doing at present is partly, actually, if you want to be very neutral about it, part of the same kind of shifting, reconstruction, patronage, and so on that has been happening over the centuries. Different people have done it. Different elites, be they merchant or be they religious leaders or different Hindu sectarian groups. And later, the governors of the Delhi sultans and the Mughal emperors, different people have been doing it, but they have always intervened in the spatial approach and appearance of Banaras. They had to, because every government realizes that they can control and rule best if they actually control spaces. Spaces belong to people, people use them on an everyday level, but the final decision about where the roads will divide up the city, where the stopping places will be, what will be inside and outside a particular kind of delineation of neighborhood, that belongs to the government. So there are 3 or 4 terms which are important in understanding the spaces of Banaras. One is, of course, Ghat, which we have already encountered. One is Kund. The whole city was full, even in 1981, when I did my research, with at least 20 very interesting kunds. And a kund is a big square body of water, artificial. That means it has stone steps all around it, just like ghats. And people used it as they do the ghats then, which was for washing and bathing and cleaning up whatever they wanted to, clothes, utensils, etc. So obviously not a very good long-term proposition. They had to be cleaned out, but unfortunately most of them have been drained and built upon. Some still exist, at least half a dozen good, very impressive kunds still exist, but there were many, there were scores of them. And though they were artificial, they were actually part of the Ganga. So the Ganga had its channels throughout the city. It was a kind of Venice, if you like, and in the times of flood, the water would then spread back into those channels and people used to boat around. They had to because there was too much water there. Recently, we had a flood this very year, 2021, and the same scenario occurred, although everything is built up. So there is a channeling of the water from the Ganga, which is not in control of people. And forget the government. There's no one who can do anything about it until, I'm sure, another huge step forward is taken in engineering. So in the original stories and presentations of Banaras, we hear that it was of staggering natural beauty. There was the river on one side, there were all these kunds and channels all through the city, and it was full of groves. It was full of trees and gardens. And that's why it was also attractive to ascetics. It was attractive to priests and so on. And there are many lovely works of fiction about what was happening in different parts of this green area. And with time, the professionalization of religion actually became greater. I do not mean anything derogatory by that. I think religion is a profession. There are people who earn their living by it. And they do use techniques of marketing. So they propagate certain deities or temples or spaces, saying this is the greatest, come here and visit here and do darshan here. And so many places in Banaras compete with each other. They're attractive to different parts of the larger country. Some Bengalis only go here and people from Tamil Nadu go there and so on. So Banaras is divided up like that. And if you read the literature that they produce, maps and other things for their own language area, in each case, they are centering their part and saying everything else is important, but ours is the most important part. So that's what I mean by professionalization. Banaras is professionally a religious city. It markets itself. It markets itself. It's very intangible. It's not one particular temple that's great, but the whole of Banaras is great. So if you come from far away, Gujarat or wherever you want to, and busloads come all the time here. Banaras is full of busloads of pilgrims. When you come, you have to visit certain spots and just drink in the ambiance of the city and its riverside. It's not an ancient place. It doesn't have ancient temples. It doesn't even have particularly, amazing, architecturally amazing temples. It just, the whole thing or the whole part of Banaras is a product. And then we have, as I said, the Mughals, before that, the Sultans and the Mughals. And I want to put on record that there is always this debate about how many temples did they actually destroy. But the debate will continue, but we can accept as a fact, statistically, enough scholars have worked on it, that though the main ones were destroyed by Aurangzeb, the main two, of which Bindu Madhav is one of them, where Alamgiri Mosque was made. On Panchganga Ghat, there is a temple which is very small, very lovely, but it's not the original one, which was large and it was broken down. However, even Aurangzeb was enough of an emperor. He actually ruled the largest extent of the Mughal Empire. He was enough of an emperor to know that he couldn't actually be put in a situation where people would revolt. Maybe I'm simplifying it, but all the other instructions were for most of the temples to be let alone. And there were enough prestigious Hindus in the government by that time, and there was enough of a powerful local elite that actually most were left untouched. Otherwise, you'd have nothing at all from that time. And that's a falsity. The majority of them stand, and because of the visual impact of the Dasashwamedh Ghat temple, I'm sorry, the Vishwanath temple next to a big mosque, and the Bindu Madhav temple next to a big mosque, and the fact that their bricks and stones were reused in the building of the mosques because of that, and then the government's reaction thanks to the colonial legacy, we have a sense of Muslims having attacked and destroyed everything. Firstly, there's no such category as Muslims. It was the ruler and the ruler's army and the ruler's decision, but his politics were also very uneven, and most of the time, he let the Mughal ruler, let the Hindu temples stand. And the Hindus were also equally ready to accept some kind of a collaboration with the rulers. And when they built afresh, many queens and kings patronized the rebuilding of temples and the new construction of temples. There have been new ones built throughout the centuries. It was, as I said before, in this interesting synthetic style, syncretistic style, which is basically Mughal.
Thank you, ma'am, for the response to the question. And before I go to a question in the chat box, you have done a lot of research on the mohallas and how people within mohallas, they create their own cultural identities. Even I had the opportunity of working on one of the mohallas in Varanasi, the Kabir Chola Mohalla. And I found through my field work, I realized that it's the way the people connect, not just physically with the Ganga, but metaphorically and emotionally and mentally, that the whole city, you rightly said, it can be compared to Venice. Venice is a celebration of life, but in Varanasi we find both life and death are simultaneously being celebrated. But the river acts as a very powerful symbol in the minds of the residents, and they somehow all the time connect with that very powerful symbol. So, how do you see the cultural identity of people evolving with time? And similar related to this is a question from Mr. Sanjay Kanvinde. I would request sir to please ask the question. Are you there, sir? No problem. I'll just, yeah, sir.
No, just wanted to know how is this new development affecting the structure of Banaras, which is completely foreign to the whole ideology.
Yeah. So, ma'am, would you like to respond to the intervention which is being done by the architect Vimal Patel about the new corridor which is being created for pilgrims?
Yeah, so there are two different questions. One is yours
Yeah.
about the mohallas,
Yeah.
and the other one is about the new developments.
Yes.
So I just gave you a very neutral and optimistic view of it when I said that there have always been new developments. There have always been. Banaras is not a static city. It has not remained the same throughout its history. It has shifted geographically. The Vishwanath temple has changed. There was a time when there was another Vishwanath temple, and because they insisted that whatever, it's got its own politics and its own history, that Dalits not be allowed inside, then another one was built and sanctioned and patronized. Then that came to seem very old and ancient, and then a third one was built in BHU by Madan Mohan Malviya, which is also called the Vishwanath temple, and that's of course has nowhere near the prestige or sacredness of the other two. But the first one is forgotten by now. No one visits it. In fact, from the outside, it's covered by shops and you can't even see it. So this kind of thing where an old structure sort of gets recycled into something else, And then after that, all you know is that there used to be something here. That has happened throughout. In fact, there is even, Dara Shuko, who should have been emperor, but history took a turn and Aurangzeb became the emperor. He was very fond of Banaras, and he did a lot of work here, and he had very lovely garden here, which used to exist uh, even until the time that I was doing my research, and has been destroyed. So that was before Mr. Modi and his government. So there have been many kinds of destroyers and constructors throughout history, and always there is a politics to it. Sometimes it's sectarian politics, sometimes it's communal politics, sometimes it's pure greed for money and profits and so on. But if you and I share some kind of love for certain kinds of traditions or the sacredness of spaces, and especially inherited spaces, beautiful spaces, that doesn't mean everyone else does. I know myself that there are beautiful mohallas. They really look as if they're out of a storybook. There's a tree at the heart of it, there's a chabutra around it, people gather there to relax and socialize, and all around our houses. And that's the essence of a mohalla, a little community that manages in itself for itself. And mohallas can be very competitive with each other. When they talk, where are you from? Mine is better than yours, that kind of feeling. That essence has actually been destroyed by the recent developments. It was probably already waning because a lot of modernization was taking place in Banaras. Everyone in Banaras wants to be modern like everywhere else. They'd rather have a smart shop with closed doors and air conditioning inside than the old arcade with pillars and a different kind, which looks so beautiful to my eyes, and I'm sure yours. So when the residents themselves want that kind of change, uh, it's very difficult to make a case, a persuasive case, why that change should not happen. If we could only reach that level of awareness where people come together with their leaders and actually want to preserve what is so wonderful and beautiful in their inherited spaces and buildings. If we could reach that level, and then we could have an intervention where local leaders, absolutely local leaders, people's leaders, would say, this must be preserved, this must be preserved, this has X value for us, this has Y memory for us. And of course, you could still have all that wonderful modernity, because that's what some cities and countries have achieved, haven't they? Think of Amsterdam and Leiden, such beautiful old cities. They've managed to preserve their oldest buildings and yet be totally modern inside somehow, and have modern buildings alongside. And all the people, all the citizens of those places, and of course numerous places in Italy and France and all that, all the people are also sensitized to the importance of preserving those spaces. So the present government is going wrong in two directions. One is it's not even tapping into any local sensitivity, local awareness, but it's not even trying to educate itself in the correct history or educate anyone else. It's all about bluster and the brightness of the lights and the smoothness of the stones that they can lay down.
Thanks. Thank you.
Uh, to take the conversation forward, we were talking about the mohalla and the sense of identity. So, how do you see that cultural identity? There'll be different in perception between the residents and visitors to the Ghat. For me, visiting the Ghat, I will be overwhelmed by the majestic architecture there, and also perplexed by the number of activities happening simultaneously there. So how do you see the difference in perception between a resident using that same space and a visitor visiting the Ghats? And how does it, they connect to their daily routine? Has it changed over the years? Do people still use the Ghats as part of their daily lives, or it's just become, as Kaustubh says, a place to visit and just to, relax and connect and socialize?
So there are two parts to this. First, I was smiling because I made a little um, comment here for myself, and Kaustubh mentioned two things. One was pan and spitting out pan and therefore dirtying parts of the city, the inevitable stains. And the second was the cow dung, and the smell of that. Now, these are both outsiders' perceptions. A person who lives in the city has no problems with either, and they are guilty, if you like, of spitting everywhere and of being fine with cows, maybe even their own cows, wandering everywhere and generously dousing every place with cow dung. It's a very difficult and hard lesson to learn how to cross that boundary between being a sensitive outsider who actually doesn't want filth and dirtiness, wants clean spaces, and being an insider who actually inhabits those spaces and has a kind of cultural identity where it's all right to spit and it's all right to walk over cow dung. All my best friends are like that in Banaras, and the only way to do it is to become on a level of um, interdependence and equality with them. Not to think I'm a reformer or I want change, but to imagine they are also reformers. They also want change. But see it in their language and see it from their perspective of having grown up there. So actually, this is why um, my husband and I set up a whole organization and a school in Banaras, because we loved everything about it so much. And at the same time, we wanted cleanliness and sanitation and sensitivity to the past and all those things which come with a modern consciousness. So we wanted to have modern consciousness come into this very nice, innocent, carefree, love of life kind of uh, awareness of being a Banarsi. We wanted to bring it in a very sensitive way so that nothing would be destroyed, but it would only be improved. So in our school, for instance, we do a lot of walking around Banaras. We actually talk about its geography, we teach its maps, we teach about its mohallas, its professions and all that. There are so many craftspeople here, we keep inviting them. And we take our children everywhere and they're always carrying a pad and pencil and they sit around and they draw it. We think that if children, right from the beginning, could be made to be aware of their surroundings, to draw their buildings and to observe them, to notice them, to know that this space, this lovely tree, we can sit under it and there's a little icon here or there's a little shrine here and the whole landscape is so beautiful around us. If you could discuss all this with them more and make them interact with it, observe it, reflect on it, write about it, draw about it, then they would grow up to be the kinds of citizens that we want, who would actually appreciate that the importance of preserving all this. It won't happen by itself. We'll have to cultivate generations of people like that. And because of our love of Banaras is why we set up a school and an organization in Banaras. And if you love spaces and you've been to Banaras or you want to, come here and I'll be happy if you contact me and if you join us in any way possible and we can do things with you. But yeah, so I think I've sort of lost your question, Urvashi, which was about the insider outsider.
Yeah. What is the difference in perception you see that an insider sees these ghats and an outsider who visits? How is the life unfolding for the two different set of
So
people?
quite some time back, a split has started occurring in India between the elites or the upper middle classes and the ordinary people, the masses. That split has become bigger with time and recently is really going very, very fast further. And at the root of it is the difference in education. Successful people, the upper middle classes, elites especially, go to very good schools and they get a very good education and they manage to fulfill whatever dreams or career prospects they have. And ordinary people who go to ordinary private schools and government schools have no such satisfaction. They are actually unskilled for whatever they need to fulfill their dreams. Their whole education is at such a poor level that they reproduce the cycle of poverty and backwardness which they inherit. And so obviously that number is growing and the split is growing. Now, why I'm mentioning this is the reflection it has on culture. And that reflection is that people have stopped participating in the same spaces. Almost everything we are talking about is for ordinary people. There are no really what they consider people of good families. That's a term used in India, right? People of good families, meaning rich people and self-consciously progressive modern people who hang around the ghats or enjoy things in the old way or do any of the actual things like chewing pan and spitting it and so on. Somehow all these things which were essentially, quintessentially Banarsi have now become only lower class practices. And upper classes have become like a globalized upper class. They sit inside their homes, they use air conditioning, they stay in closed spaces, they enjoy things on the internet and so on. And there's no more public space participation for them. They wouldn't even probably go to a mall unless to pick up something. The malls are full of um, ordinary people, just like other public spaces are. So this big split between classes in India is reflected in the participation in public spaces in Banaras. And that's why Mr. Modi has built his corridor. He wants people to be motored in. Everyone used to walk through the gullies to go to the ghats. There was no ghat accessible by car. My father, back in those days, you know, he would have been 100 now, so it's a long time back that I'm speaking of. 50 years ago, he was the Director General of Police of Uttar Pradesh. That's a very high position at that time. And I remember once that he was driven in a police car right up to a few yards of the river. And I was shocked because, and I justified it saying, you know, only a police officer can do that. And literally no one else could do that. You always had to walk. And of course, the rest of the time he did walk barefoot actually to the temple or to the ghat. But now the idea is that any VIP should be closeted in a vehicle and be taken very smoothly, driven right up to the river. And this is absurd. And it really emphasizes the split I'm talking about between the so-called privileged person, the upper class of India, and the ordinary people.
Yeah, true. I think, ma'am, what you have just mentioned is quite right, that the split is ever growing, and even the way we approach the city or the mohallas or the ghats is an experience in itself, and it is quite transformative. So, being driven down to the river edge as compared to walking down the streets, trying to figure out the ways through these myriad lanes, and encountering different people is also an experience in which you get to know the city better. And as you also earlier rightly mentioned, that there is a need to understand the sensitivity with which the people of Banaras see the city. And that is where the response to the city in terms of future development also comes in. So there is one question from Manju in the audience. Manju, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Uh, yeah, hi, sure. Hi, Urvashi. Hi, Nita ma'am. Very interesting discussion is happening, and I'm really intrigued by the perspective that you have presented for the city of Varanasi. Being in this profession where we think in terms of problem solving for a particular city, I just wanted to have this question for you that as a city, as a city as a whole, what do you think in short term, let's say a decade or so, or in a longer term, what would Varanasi like to be as a city? You know, what is its vision? So because you understand not only at the neighborhood scale, you understand the urban issues, you understand how the ghats and the water body, you know, we're talking about the river conservation, so many and different set of projects also coming up, projects of urban design, projects of river conservation and cleaning up. Um, how do you see, what is the city aspiring for? You know, what is its vision in let's say a decade, what it wants to be? Because every city sort of has a soul. People have a vision. Some are very ambitious cities, you know, they tend to have real estate projects. Some cities, so always what I feel that either it's people or the leadership or professionals, they do have a vision for the city. So I would just like to know yours about Varanasi.
Yeah, thank you. That is such an interesting question. And it makes me want to rush out and do some research. Because of COVID, I haven't been able to mingle with a lot of people, for months and months. Hardly, of course, I walked around as much as it seemed feasible to do, but not at all like my habit. I used to go out on any pretext and just spend time in the streets and mohallas and chat with everyone and all that. So when you say what is the vision of the city, it's difficult to know whose city, because as I'm saying, it's class divided, and that's a very important division. I think it's looking very, very bad right now. Let me just describe to you how it looks right now. It's a old city, pre-colonial city, which means by definition that it has not only narrow lanes for the most part, but the main streets are very narrow. And there are only about 3 or 4 main streets in the whole city, going north to south and east to west, just that many, about 4 or 5. That's all I can think of. And they're very narrow. But the number of larger vehicles, and of course smaller also, but really big fat ones, is growing up so exponentially that all the time there's a traffic jam everywhere, and honking and pollution, sound and air pollution. And then there is, because of population growth, there is a dearth of space for all those roadside vendors and all that, and that kind of life is still continuing. So there is a huge conflict which is at breaking point. Things are becoming worse all the time in this respect. And I think if I was to be optimistic, I'd say they have to get worse before they become better. So I'm trying to harbor a vision of a better kind of Banaras in the future. It would have to depend on some very, very crucial things. The first one would be, if I could be cynical, just the market sensibility of people. Now, if Banaras, as I was saying, is actually a product to be marketed, it has to be a viable place. No one is going to come to it if it's just chock-a-block with traffic and that's all they're going to experience. So the serenity of the ghats, the beauty of the lanes, the old-fashioned things which made Banaras what it was, have to be somehow maintained and preserved. And I think it's going to strike the commercial leaders, who in turn should be able to influence the ruling party and so on, in order to preserve the city. That kind of a turn has often been seen in history. Just on the verge of a breakdown, people came to their senses and realized that if we make this into any other kind of small town in UP or elsewhere, who's going to bother about it? Who really is going to ever want to come here? And since they want their pilgrims and tourists, that's the major industry of Banaras, they're going to wake up, and it will therefore, most of it will be preserved. They're not going to uproot the old ancient trees with their spreading boughs and the lovely steps and that whole riverside. It's a huge riverside going from north to south. It's 100 ghats at least, and worth preserving. So they're going to be able to do that. The lanes and the shrines in the lanes I have less hope for, because the ruling party has already set a bad role model by breaking down, literally breaking down and destroying a whole maze of lanes in this heart of the city, including its shrines. There's a lot of talk about that in the media. I'll be happy to share any links if you like. But actually, the BJP has broken down shrines and temples. After all, it's fuss about, this kind of activity. So if they can do that and get away with it, that means more and more of it can be done. And since people in our country do not value history and the physical aspects of it, such as old buildings or shrines, they're just going to break their own houses if they get a good enough price for it, regardless of what kind of a place it is. So the ghats will remain, I hope, and I think they will. And the temples and most of the places which are therefore a little bit safe. But in order to reach them, there will be a massive reconstruction of Banaras, because partly, as I said, it's not even possible to go and come right now the way things are. So some kind of change is inevitable. but also because that's the politics, that you need to not walk on foot, but you need to be carried in a car. Now, some of these old cities like Amsterdam and Leiden that I mentioned actually they have made it so difficult that no one uses a car inside it. There's no place to park. You're fined a whole lot if you put it anywhere. So everyone who goes to Amsterdam naturally parks outside, takes public transport, and then uses their feet or their cycle to move around inside. So it's very quiet and beautifully preserved inside. And all the main centers of old cities like Brussels and all that, they're not open to traffic. You have to walk only on foot. That's my dream of Banaras, that it should become a place where you can only walk around on foot. And all around it, there should be a circle within which cars can't enter.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To take this conversation forward, while we are talking about the vision for the city, there is one very tricky word that, how do we, as you rightly said earlier in your, this conversation, that the city has been recycling itself. Now, with respect to this present major intervention that is happening in Banaras, uh, as you said, there will be shrines inside the houses. There are houses which have grown around shrines. So how does one, kind of, define this term in terms of encroachment? Because I think the word encroachment is something which has been used to justify the major restructuring of the lanes. That these were houses which had got built around shrines, and shrines had been reclaimed by the owners. And how do you see that panning out in Varanasi?
I'm not sure I can answer that. It's a matter of detail in every separate neighborhood and locality. I mean, I don't think it's the common phenomenon. I think there is a lot of encroachment. I've seen it in front of my eyes, how a little tiny shrine at the foot of a tree gradually got a platform, then it got a wall around it, then it got more pakka, then it got a ceiling and a roof, and now there's someone who's even living there. I've seen all that happen. But if I saw it and it was so obvious in one place, there are dozens and scores of places where actually people had shrines inside their homes. It's not that it's the rule. And that's I mean, if that's the reason being given for breaking up the lanes and the homes and the shrines, I think we have to dismiss it as a very poor kind of distorting kind of reason. That's not the case in the Vishwanath area that I'm aware of. I'm very familiar with that area. I've crisscrossed it hundreds of times. I've studied it. I've interviewed people there. I never had that impression. It's a very well-established, rooted area.
Yeah, in fact, even in my experience of other, going beyond the Pakka Mahal to the Kacha Mahal, the Mohallas which are beyond, I've seen houses where people had their own personal shrines. So it is very difficult to even say that, whether this shrine was part of the residence originally, or, people constructed a house around it. So I think that's a very tricky, situation to justify, or to pick out certain structures and say that these are the ones that should need to be demolished to widen the street. uh, uh, I think so. There is this interesting, the sense, the understanding of the city has to evolve, as you mentioned, that the people who are in power, the designers, the professionals like us, and the people who are the government who is responsible for making policies, major changes, needs to be sensitive about how people see the city themselves. And I think it's through these continuous processes of community engagement and collecting these narratives and stories from the people and what is important to them will actually set the tone for how the city should develop in the future. And on this very optimistic note that you mentioned, that there are turns in history where people have realized suddenly that this is what should be done for a city, and not the changes or modernization, the unplanned things that are happening. So I think, hoping that the spirit of the city will rise to the occasion and will give a narrative and a direction to future development in Varanasi. On that note, I would like to close this session. Thank you so much, Professor Nita Kumar, for your very insightful, narratives, experiences, and insights on how the city should progress and develop. Thank you, Kaustubh, for your beautifully made uh, video on the Panchganga Ghat, and I'm sure you would have learned much from Professor Nita Kumar's conversations about how an outsider looks at the city and how an insider sees the city and what is of importance to the two. I would like to share the poster for the next session. The next Play Story session titled Pushkar Street Market is scheduled for 21st November 2021 from 5 p.m. onwards. Our play storyteller for the session, Mr. Divyang Jain, will be taking us out in the streets of Pushkar. The place expert for the session, Mr. Sameer Chadha, will explore the cultural nuances and the spiritual underpinnings of such immersive social spaces. So stay tuned for our upcoming Play Story session on 21st November. I would like to thank each one of you for your patronage to the Festival of Places. Do visit our website www.indiaheritagehub.org for more engaging content. You can also support and participate in multiple initiatives and programs of CATS by volunteering your skills and supporting us financially. You can write to us at info@catsindia.org for more details. So look forward to meeting all of you again next Sunday on 21st November, same time, same place, for another exciting journey to the public spaces in our cities. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Kaustubh.